Hello, everyone. I'm sports journalist Manouk Akopyan. Today, we are joined by none other than Stephen Espinoza, a longtime television executive who is now at Showtime for for the better part of the last decade. And his current role is as the president of sports and event programming. And Stephen, we have a lot to talk about as far as what sports and boxing specifically looks like for Showtime and the entire sport to begin with, but more specifically, we're celebrating an anniversary here now, with 5 years of perhaps the biggest fight, lucratively in a business standpoint, in Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Mayweather in 2015, May the 2nd. And you were a very formative part of that deal and that promotion and that process. So, there's no better person to talk to as far as the making of that. So I wanted to gauge your thoughts on that. And from the moment the contract was signed for that fight, to the promotion, to fight night, all the way down to tabulating those astronomical numbers shortly afterwards, what is your most favorite highlight from that event?
Well, keep in mind, this was, it wasn't sort of a 6-month process or even a year or two. In my prior role before I came to Showtime as the outside attorney for Golden Boy Promotions, I was involved in the initial negotiations. So I think my experience with that matchup started in late 2009. And so at that point, Floyd is working with Golden Boy Promotions. I'm drafting up the term sheets, which then went over to Top Rank to try and do a promoter to promoter deal. And at that point, there weren't any network issues since both fighters were at HBO, and that fell apart, rather famously over the issue of drug testing. And that first attempt back in 2009 is really the closest that anyone got to making the fight until 2015, when the fight was actually made. So I would say, there's tremendous relief. Got to sort of tie up one loose end in my career. Something that, should have hopefully gotten done 2009, eventually got done in 2015. One of the things I remember most was probably a critical point in the negotiation. And that happened it was late January of 2015. We were fairly well into the negotiation, but still some sticking points, still very much up in the air whether the event would happen. I was in Arizona for the Super Bowl, and it was Super Bowl week, Wednesday or Thursday, I believe. And I was out to dinner. I'd seen on social media that Floyd and Manny had run into each other at the Miami Heat game. And, that sort of caused social media to explode and people, all kinds of speculation, things like that. I was at dinner just with some friends, and, must have been, close to between 9 and 10 p.m. I got a call from Floyd, and he said, FaceTime me. And, FaceTiming is not something I normally had done with Floyd. In fact, at that point, I was very much a BlackBerry guy, so there was no FaceTiming. So I borrowed a friend's phone, FaceTimed him, and when the picture came up, it was Floyd sort of holding the phone. But I could see that there was a couch, and right next to the couch was Manny Pacquiao. And it's him in a couch, and it looks like they're in a hotel room. And Floyd asked me, he said, look, just need you to, sorry to interrupt whatever you're doing, I've got something to ask you. Manny has concerns, he has doubts whether we're serious about making this fight. Can you tell him, everything that you've been doing and everything that we've been doing, and, let him know that we're serious about making this fight. And so I filled him in, he didn't know who I was, at that point. But I think, hopefully it was somewhat effective. And, Floyd asked the same questions from Manny about whether he was serious about the fight. And I think at that point, that's what really streamlined the negotiation from that point, because even after 6 years plus of negotiation, even the progress that we had made in the last few months, there was still a fundamental distrust between the two principals, between the two fighters, of whether this would ever get done. And that phone call, that meeting, that chance encounter is really what sealed the deal.
Right, and we know so many of the anecdotes that happened and the stories that happened leading up to that as well too. And you were on both sides of the table, like you said, before you headed over to Showtime. You were trying to make that fight happen in 2009 as well too. Considering there's both sides to this coin, where the 6 years building up the fight made it the business success that it was, and the 6 years marinating the fight ended up being the lackluster performance we saw inside of it. You're a businessman at the end of the day, but you're in charge of putting on the product. How do you feel? What is your stance on that? Like, how does it outweigh each other?
Yeah, well, look, I wish people had walked away from the event with with more satisfaction. To be completely honest, because that's the only thing that I think didn't go off well. I mean, obviously the promotion worked well, the sales worked well, and the results was phenomenal. But there was a lot of grumbling after the fight, and I think I'm not sure all of it was fair. And now that now that we're in this period right now where we're looking at some old fights and replays more commonly, there seems to be in the beginning of maybe a different take, and that maybe with a little bit of time people look back and see that it was a very technical, strategic, high level fight. If you were looking for if you're looking for Hagler Hearns, you weren't going to get it. If you're looking for a Rocky movie, that's not what you were getting. And maybe because there were so many casual fans watching, maybe there wasn't quite the appreciation for the strategic performance. But I actually think that that fight went about how you'd expect. What does Floyd do? He takes your best tool away, whatever it is, left hand, right hand movement. He neutralizes it, and a lot of fighters, don't have a plan B. And it didn't seem that Pacquiao had a plan B that night. And but Floyd did everything that he promised to do. And in fact, after the fight, I think he posted a link back to an interview he had done 6 years prior, or in 2009. And in 2009, he said, "Look, we will fight. Manny and I will have a fight. It will be the biggest event ever, and I'm going to be so dominant, people are going to say it's boring." So he reposted that, and it turned out to be absolutely right. But I don't think it was a bad fight. It was a strategic, technical fight, but which isn't everybody's cup of tea.
Yeah.
But overall, that's the only thing I would change.
The way I look at it is like, we've all been to a nice steakhouse. When you pay $100 for a steak, you expect a certain quality, a certain experience to come along with that price tag. And, when you're kind of dealt with a subpar meal, you start complaining. And I think that's exactly what this was, where it's like, I don't think they felt that it lived up to a price tag or a build up or the hype or that sort of a thing. But, most importantly, it delivered from a business standpoint for you guys. How did the fight shape Showtime from that perspective, and for you to reinvest into the programming in the sport soon afterward?
Well, it was a critical move for us, both practically speaking, because obviously Floyd had a lot left in the tank. He set the new pay-per-view records 3 times in the course of that deal. At a certain point, it really sent the message that we were serious about being in premium boxing. Because when I started, which was late 2009, Showtime had a great history. I mean, going back to to Hagler and Tyson and Holyfield and Chavez and Zab Judah and all the way through Vasquez and Marquez and Carlos Castillo and all of those. But at that point, I think it's fair to say that HBO was viewed as the leader in the sport in terms of premium sports. So getting Floyd over signaled both on practical and symbolically that we weren't going to be the little brother, that we weren't just going to be satisfied with getting fights that other people have passed on, that we were in this to do the biggest events and to be true premium distribution partner for the biggest fights that we can do. And there's not any way that we could have better sent that message than by signing Floyd Mayweather.
When you retire, will signing Floyd to that pay-per-view deal be the hallmark of your career? No matter what you do from here on out, is that going to be your hallmark of your career?
Probably so. Just because of the success in the deal, the memorable events, and sort of his stature, his iconic stature in the sport. But I think for me personally and professionally, I think it sticks with me for those reasons as well as one other. It was a tremendous risk for the company and for myself personally. And there I was a year into the job, in 2012 and then later in 2013, pitching my new bosses on what would ultimately be at that time the biggest individual sports contract in history. Talking in the neighborhood of $300 million as a commitment. So on one hand, you had me, who I've been a TV executive for all of a year, coming in and saying, hey, I really think that this would be a good idea. Why don't we commit and put $300 million on the line on my word and on Floyd's word that he was going to be as busy as he was. It was a tremendous risk. And I remember Leslie Moonves, my boss at the time, his comment to me was, look, he asked me one question after I made the presentation. And he said, you think we should do this? I said, yes, absolutely. He said, okay, well, if this is successful, I'm going to make sure that you get the credit for it. This is not going to be anybody's baby but your own. But if this isn't successful, then it's on you as well. So, which is intimidating, but that's what you want to hear from your boss. It's like, okay, if you have something that you're passionate about, committed to, he said, okay, well, go ahead and you'll live or die with your performance on this event.
You have the beautiful backdrop of New York in the background, and we can go back to the baseball team in your backyard and the New York Yankees and every high-priced acquisition that they made. For every boom, there was a lot of busts as well too. And when you bust, the blowback is harsh and it's big. So the fact that you hit a home run on that deal, like you said, breaking 3 pay-per-view records in success in that series of fights, goes to show you the impact of the deal and how much and how beneficial it was for all parties. Now, I have to ask you, 5 years removed, the proliferation of mobile devices, apps, smart TVs and such, 4.4 was the original number. How well do you would have think it done today with the advent of the resources we have?
It's really interesting because as we get along, we get further along in the technological cycle, it becomes easier and easier to distribute and market and really make it a worldwide event in a way that we couldn't do even 10 or 20 years ago, and certainly more than that as we look historically. But it's also easier to pirate. So I think I'd like to think, look, we eventually ended up at 4.6 million buys after everything came in. And that still seems like a ridiculous number to me, regardless. And so when you say, look, could it be bigger today? I'm still in disbelief that it was as big as it was, because that really was, I mean, a multiple, exponentially bigger than what we had seen on any pay-per-view event of any kind, boxing or otherwise, before that.
hmm Now, going back to the sour taste that left in fans' mouth, obviously Pacquiao came afterwards, claimed he had a shoulder injury. Fans even filed a lawsuit claiming it was
Mhm.
reported, and they want to seek damages. Ultimately, the fight turned some fans off. What is your stance on the long-term impact it had on the growth of the sport? And do you think it was a one-night grab, or was it something that actually helped the sport moving forward down the line, and you can see some of the connective tissue there?
Um, Without question, at least to me, it was something that paid off in benefits across the sport for a long time to come. I think it reminded everybody, how big the sport at its best can be. Obviously, those are rare events. I'm not saying that you can do that regularly, but in an era, it reminded people what the potential for this sport is, with these big matchups. And it also raised, we saw it in our numbers, we saw it in the press and publicity. It did bring people into the sport, and it did put the sport in people's sort of vision, in their mind, increase the conversation of the sport. So it without question, in terms of awareness of the sport and other fighters, it was something. It was one of those rising tide that lifts all boats. Again, sure, there was some dissatisfaction on, that the fight could have been more exciting, but the reality is, it's hard for me to believe that people walked away from that event and said, "Look, I'm never watching boxing again." It was a very technical fight. I expected, quite honestly, that that Manny would be a little bit more aggressive than he was. I mean, Floyd does what he did, and I think the problem is we just didn't see the aggression that we are usually used to seeing in Pacquiao, whether it's because of the shoulder or Floyd's defense or a combination of things.
Now, here we are talking about a mega fight, the fight of the century so far, and we're now transitioning over into crowd-free events, considering the global pandemic that we're in.
Right.
Here we are talking about Gates breaking all-time records with the millions that it generated, and now promoters are willing to sacrifice all that for the sake of putting on shows, keeping partners happy, getting advertising revenue back on networks. Considering you staged the crowd-free card with Brandon Lee,
Mhm.
the last card in the United States before coronavirus really shut everything down, what were your biggest takeaways from that event, and how do you advise adapting and applying new methods moving forward, considering this is going to be the current state of the sport for the time being?
Well, that Showbox fight that we did in mid-March was, obviously we went back and forth a lot. Cancel, don't cancel, crowds, no crowds. It was an imperfect situation, and we just tried to make the best of it. But looking at the event itself, when the telecast started, it didn't feel that different than I expected. I'm not sure they really noticed it. Now, that's Showbox, and Showbox are smaller shows in smaller venues. So certainly, when you're looking at Wilder fights or Spence fights or Gervonta Davis, it would definitely make a difference in the perception. But I think, as between having no boxing or having boxing in an empty arena or in a soundstage, I think it's a no-brainer. I think people want to get back in all segments of the industry, not just the sport. So if what it takes is not being in front of a crowd, it'll be incumbent on all of us in the sport, and particularly on the production side, to do something to make it more interesting and more engaging, so you don't feel or don't miss the crowd as much as you might otherwise.
Right. And for the rest of the year, you sit on the opposite side of the table from a promoter. You take the product and put it forward to the consumers. You
Mhm.
you're not involved with the gate. You're not involved with all the other stuff that comes along with that. The promoter is really keeping their eyes on. So you come from a precarious position. Just give me the product. I want the product.
Mhm.
You're going to have to approach the calendar and the rest of the year in a very from a unique position. How are you going to reallocate the budget to bring the quality cards to the network that you really want?
Yeah, it's an interesting position. It's a really good question because let's say, even now, um, you know, we could go, or any boxing promoter, any network could go to Florida and do an event without a crowd. And now with the reopening of several other states, there are probably other places that would allow us to do it as well. Um, but to be completely honest, we're not comfortable going to Florida and doing an event, even under very strict guidelines. So we have to be comfortable first and foremost that we are not exposing our own employees, our own staff, or the fighters or anyone else to unnecessary risk. There's probably going to be risk going forward, no matter what we do. It's going to be a fact of life. Um, but you know, I think for our own consciences, we have to be comfortable that we are doing everything we can, and you know, we have to sleep at night saying that we are recommending that all these people gather for this purpose. Um, and so I think one of the things that that sticks in my mind in thinking about that process is it needs to be worth it. And I think there's definitely a lot of pressure to get back in a lot of different venues, and certainly across combat sports as well. I don't think we're going to be one of the first ones back, because we're not going to just come back for the sake of coming back and doing something. Um, we're a premium network. We do premium level fights. And, for example, let's just say May 15th, we get a green light to come back to work, do, all the things that would make it possible to go forward with an event. At still point to maximize the fighter's performance, you still need to give them time to train and prepare, because there's a big chunk, I would say the majority, certainly, of boxers that don't have access to regular training. They can't go to the gym. They're in lockdown. They certainly can't get sparring partners. There are international travel restrictions that interfere with some training. So if we were to say, okay, on May 15th, okay, we're all back, let's go, first week of June, I guarantee it wouldn't be a very good product. And so I think what we need to do is take our time, come back right with the right fights at the right time to try and reduce the risk as much as possible and do premium level fights that are worthy of the audience. I think there's a feeling that right now the audience is desperate for anything they can get in sports, which is probably true. But we're not going to take advantage of that and just throw a bunch of stuff out there to say we're back. We're going to do high level fights and a series of high level fights. That's the plan, and that's going to remind people why they love boxing, even before all this took place.
Yeah, and boxing's in a very unique position because it's not like the NBA or MLB or NHL where here's 10 days, guys, get ready.
Right.
Season's resuming in 10 days. Boxing, you need that 8-week training camp. You need to have the promotion to make sure that the word is amplified. With crowd fear events, I don't think promotion would be that big of a deal, but it still requires time to amplify an event. Now, you're an executive, but I have to ask you, if you could play matchmaker and only bring one fight to Showtime this year, your prototypical dream fight, what would that be?
Well, that's a really, really good one.
You're the
I would
matchmaker.
have, yeah, I would, if there's one that I would say is, there's several. It's hard to choose. I really, you know, you know, we've worked a lot with the Charlos. In fact, until last year, they never appeared anywhere other than Showtime. And I think there's a lot of talk about Jamal Charlo and Demetrius Andrade. I think the real fight, the one that would really bring people out, is Jamal Charlo and Canelo. And I think that is a pick'em fight. I think that Charlo physically and athletically presents a lot of challenges. So I think that's one. I would say, obviously there's a lot of unfinished business in the welterweight division. With a lot of those, guys getting busy. And I'd say even at 154, I think there can be some unification fights. So look, you asked for one fight. I gave you one, but I'd also say, look, Benavidez, Caleb Plant is one that I think is makeable in the relatively near future. Jermell Charlo as a unification fight, I think. And I would say Tank versus Leo Santa Cruz or Gary Russell or even Ryan Garcia. All three are really mouth-watering fights.
And you would want all of those fights on Showtime?
I would love them. They're probably, you're right. My eyes are bigger than my stomach right now. But
so let me rephrase the question. One fight for Showtime specifically. It could be a pay-per-view.
One fight for Showtime specifically, I would say that if it were saying non-pay-per-view, I would probably say Benavidez Plant.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of David Benavidez. I think he's a really exciting young fighter, and he's got a really promising future. And Caleb Plant's just obviously accomplished in his own right and has a lot to bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. How close were we to having a Leo Santa Cruz Gervonta Davis fight before coronavirus reared its ugly head? It sounded like
we were very close. We were very close. Look, that's a lot of people were surprised at that matchup. Leo is absolutely adamant that he wants the fight. It's the only fight he wants, and he is absolutely convinced that he sees something, that he and his trainer see something that guarantees them success. So, look, look, Tank is a physical challenge for anybody in the weight class or near the weight class. But Leo is, he's undaunted and he is persistent. So I think we're very, very close. Now, that's an interesting one because that's one that will do a very good gate, regardless of where it is. And so that fight could fit naturally in LA. If LA isn't ready, certainly Vegas or Texas would make reasonable choices as well. So I do think that'll be one of the first few fights that we have when we're back in business.
And the Showtime pay-per-view, I presume.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it would be Tank Davis's first pay-per-view debut and kind of building the narrative on his status as a draw. A lot has been made over the last 18 months as far as the dynamite he brings not only in the ring but in the seats as well too, with what he does. Another line of your business that is now back in your front is MMA and Bellator. Some time has passed since the Viacom realignment. I'm curious as to how Bellator fits in Showtime's picture now and how you plan on moving with MMA moving forward.
Well, we're excited to have it back. We were off to a really good start, had a lot of momentum with Strikeforce when it was purchased by UFC, and that was sort of the end of that opportunity. So looking at Strikeforce, Viacom is absolutely committed to it. They want to grow it. They see the potential. In the merger, I think it made sense to have me have oversight of it simply because, combat sports, unite the two combat sports businesses, which are in the portfolio. And because of the relationship, with Scott Coker, I've known him for almost 20 years, dealt with him before Strikeforce, during Strikeforce, and since. And, he's an important part of the Strikeforce world. So we have a lot of plans. Obviously the coronavirus has sort of interrupted a lot of them. So we're anxious to get back in business. There's a DAZN deal in place. They're the distribution partner, along with Paramount Network, for Strikeforce. You're going to honor that deal. There's no plan otherwise. But in the long run, we're going to try and continue to grow the business in a way that is organic and is rewarding to the fans.
Is it safe to say Bellator will end up on Showtime or CBS properties at some point?
I think that's the goal. Generally, is to use the combined power of the entire corporation. CBS Sports Network, the cable networks, potentially All Access, and Showtime as well. I think in the long term, all of those assets are going to be used to help Bellator grow. The timing on that remains to be seen. Obviously, there's still a good amount of time left under the DAZN deal, and that'll be played out, and then we'll see where to go from there.
And that gives you plenty of time to get creative. I can't wait to see a night where we have boxing and MMA on the same night. Bring the cage up and down several times a night if you have to, and we can perhaps even have these crossover fights that we keep talking about, and it just makes headlines, and then it falls on deaf ears afterwards.
That's one of the exciting things. That's certainly something that Scott Coker and I have kicked around and brainstormed. It's certainly, we start with something where it's, we're pairing them together programming wise on the same night and start blending those audiences, and then maybe a hybrid event at some point. Strikeforce has done that in the past with kickboxing. They've done sort of joint kickboxing and MMA events where they alternated things. So they have experience with that. They have figured out how to do it, and I think it would be an absolute natural. And I'm excited to see when and how quickly we can do something like that.
Yeah, and as a member of the media who covers both sports, I salivate at the thought of doing both in one night and having best of both worlds. So hopefully some serious steam gets built in that direction, and we have something of a unique event that we haven't had at a grand scale in a long time. So looking forward to see you putting your minds together and making that happen. And again, Stephen, thank you very much for your time and reflecting.
Love to do it. Happy to do it anytime.
And the future of combat sports as well. We'll really appreciate it.
All right, great. Absolutely. Anytime, you know where to find me.
Thank you very much.
All right.